How's it going, everyone? It's Marshall, and this is Thru Port Collective. Thank you for tuning in to the show tonight. I'm here with Cryss Smith and Tim Grogan. How's it going, everyone? It's Marshall, and this is Thru Port Collective.
Oh, we're getting some.
That was me. That was me. That's my bad. Sorry about that.
Yes, we've all done it once at least.
Yes. We're balanced out now.
So tonight we're going to talk about some mixing techniques, some examples of mixing electronic music. And but before we do that, real quick, let's just do a little catch up on how things have been for everyone through the week. So, Cryss, what's been up, man?
Oh boy. So you know, I'm thinking like, man, I've had a crazy week. Like the last 2 weeks, really, and I've been busy, and then wasn't feeling good and stuff, and then just hearing about Tim's last couple days has made me, like, okay, well, maybe I can handle this. But no, things have been good. Actually, I've been working on there's a Pulsar modular plugin coming out called P565 Siren, which is initially been based off of like the Yuri 565 filter, but then it's got all these extra cool tricks on it, and they're adding features and envelope follower and all this stuff. So I've been working on presets for that and some beta testing and fine tuning for the guys at Pulsar. So that's been a pretty fun project, and what's kind of been sneaking in there to grab some of my attention lately.
Very cool.
That is cool.
And Tim. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask Cryss, how much longer is that going on with your testing?
Well, they're coming up to the release. I would expect that it's going to be probably, I don't know for sure, and I'm not privy to that, but it's going to be released soon. It's kind of had a beta release, but some fine tuning and tweaking, and I appreciate that I've gotten to add some features to it, which has been fun. But that's the one great thing about Pulsar Modular, and Zia, the guy behind it, is like he's really receptive. If there's a good idea that comes in from outside, they try to implement it. So I've sent over some presets for part of the factory set, and so I think my part is on pause right now, but I'll be doing some video work and things like that coming up.
Very cool. So Tim, what you been up to, man? You've been busy.
It's been a busy week, yeah. I've been I played a gig that had a few notable country celebrities or whatever on it, and that was Monday night. And so on Sunday I had to do some woodshedding. I had to learn some songs, and then it was a private party, and it was Monday night, but Monday was like, load in and sound check and kind of run through these songs with guys we hadn't played with before, and then just take a break and then do the gig that night. Well, the next morning, first thing, I had an 8:30 flight after being up a little bit late for that gig, and I had to fly to Dallas, and I did a house closing there. We sold the family house. Got that done yesterday, and then this morning flew back, and I got in a little bit later, and then was trying to get a couple things accomplished for around the studio here so I could do a better live stream with you guys, but sadly I still didn't manage to do that in time to start. But it's just been a few things back to back, and I got like 1 hour sleep that one night, and then got up and was like at it all day. And so it's, how you just push through it. You find your ways to do it, but it's been kind of crazy. But I'm super happy to be here and back in the saddle of doing this. Dallas was, like I had mentioned to you guys earlier, 108 degrees, and it's hot everywhere. but it's great to be back, and I'm ready to kind of get back on my agenda. So yeah, man, that's kind of what's up. And we're going to talk some mixing.
Heck yeah. So yeah, for me, I decided to tear apart my JD800. So that's what I've been working on the last week. It's had the red glue issue since I moved out here to Florida. It's kind of a bummer because I've had that thing for years. And when I came out here, I went to go use it for, I was going to try and do a comparison between the JD08 and the JD800. and I realized that the glue had leaked into the key bed, and the keys were stuck, and all kinds of bad stuff happened. So I had to tear it apart. And it's not a very simple mechanism for that key bed. It's really kind of a pain. So I've got it all apart right now. I got all the glue cleaned up, and I broke a couple of the keys. Of course, I did. So I'm waiting on some parts from a Centaur. So yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Project World.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of synth repairs, and if I could find somebody that could fix it, I probably would have sent it to him. But it's easier said than done.
Wagyu, red glue, take a drink. Yeah. That's hilarious. No doubt.
Awesome. Yeah. So, folks, we're gonna have a little chat here about some mixing, and I think how are we gonna start this off? We're gonna start off with the collab that we did with Jamie, or
yeah, it seems a good place as any. What do you guys want to do?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. We gonna play that all the way through, or part of it, or what?
Why don't you play part of it, I guess, and we'll stop, and then we can come back and maybe just hit spots of it.
Yeah. Okay. So everyone knows this is a collaborative piece of music that Chris, myself, Tim, and Jamie Morton of Geosynths did. And Tim did the mix for this whole thing, and also contributed to kind of some of the arrangement after the parts were in. So he kind of finalized the track and did the mixing and did an excellent job. So yeah, let's throw that up for everyone real quick, and then Tim, you can show us your session. And
yeah, okay, sounds good.
Okay. I'll tell you what, I'll start it right at the beginning, and then I'll just pop it through somewhere where there's more stuff going on.
There you go.
All right. Are you guys getting audio on that?
Yes.
Yep. Well, that was odd for me. I couldn't hear any of it.
Oh, yeah. No, it sounded great.
Well, that sounded good on this end.
I hope everyone on the stream heard it. Did you guys hear it?
Did you hear that?
Yeah, hit F in the chat if you could hear
it. That's crazy. Well, all right then. I don't see any comments about it. Oh, sounds fine. Okay, stream was good. Okay. All right. Good. Thanks, guys.
Wow.
That's fun.
So, Brian.
That's funny. An imposing figure.
So, well, let's just kind of take this from some of the basics. So, some of the people watching are going to be just fantastic mixers, and then some are going to be fairly new to this. So maybe first just a definition of what is mixing, what does that encompass in the music production process?
Yeah, that's so many things, right? It's Chris, you said you had a good sentence from the description of this show, which was the art and science of mixing, and it is both of those things. And to my little post about it, I added Zen, because there's a point where it's kind of not art or science, and you're just sort of massaging this sort of almost nebulous thing. So, but yeah, it is. There is an art to it. Obviously, there's a lot of artistic and subjective choices, and
Mm-hmm.
then there are objectively things that usually work. That a lot of people seem to like. So that's kind of a starting point, isn't it? Like about what a mix is, or how mixing is. It's like there's some things that are really subjective, and then there are certain things that you sort of expect to hear, and objectively you would want to hear them. And then aside from that, yeah, just right, just the actual balancing of tones, making choices, EQ, all this type of thing, compression.
Yeah, and I would agree. It's definitely about balance. Once your track is pretty much complete in terms of composition and all that stuff, you're going to focus on trying to get that balance in the track right in terms of your mids, lows, highs. Make sure you want certain timbres or sounds to stand out as you
Mm-hmm.
are as the artist. Like there's certain things you're going to want to try to draw the listener attention to. You can do some of that with mixing.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, definitely an
Definitely.
art and a science, subjective and objective at the same time.
Mm.
There's people that will listen to your stuff and hate certain things maybe that you did, but I mean, at the end of the day, as long as it doesn't sound like crap, it's probably all right. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't have like all this bass, like when I used to started mixing, I didn't have good monitors, and I would overdo the bass because I couldn't hear any on the
Yeah.
little speakers I had. So that's an issue that sometimes people struggle with there. I think. So it does help to have a good set of monitors that give you a wide enough range in the spectrum so that you can hear what's happening and make adjustments appropriately. And that kind of applies in the mastering side too, but just in general for mixing,
Definitely.
that's really important.
Yeah. Well, you
I
said you were talking.
Go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
Chris.
Tim. With balance, that's a pretty important word to me in mixing. However, if for a person that's maybe just beginning it may be assumed that balance means everything being equal, but that's not really what it is. Balance is finding a harmonious mix of things, but with very purposeful misbalances and timbres and volume, that the collective is a balance in it. And there's where again like that art and subjectivity of it maybe comes in quite a bit, because what's the kind of picture you want to paint with the sound. But yeah, not necessarily, because I think one of the things is like maybe in the beginning I was like, well, can I hear everything? Is everything equal? And like that's maybe not a good mixing strategy. Or what were you saying, Tim?
No, I was going down that same road that you're talking about, but yeah, balance is completely subjective as to like what's important. So, like strategy wise, the first thing I do for a mix is what is its purpose? Where is it going? Is it going to be played in a club, with banging subwoofers and everything else, or is it going on YouTube, or is it streaming? So I actually will make different mixes tailored to
Mm,
those situations. And usually it's about for like if people, so many people just listen on their phone, right? Or maybe their computer speakers. And if it's a mix for YouTube, I mix bass heavy and treble heavy,
mm-hmm.
and also I mix effects heavy for YouTube and for anything that's streaming that people are listening to on a phone, because the phone loses so much of that depth,
Yeah.
and it loses the effects a lot, like reverb and delay and stuff is kind of pushed back in there, and obviously bass can really get lost. So I find ways to bring out the bass and also kind of turn it up a little bit too. It's definitely louder on my mixes for YouTube, or even for streaming. I'll push those things, but if I know it's just like going on to like a club or something, then I mix the opposite of that.
Yeah.
I mix a little bass shy, because they're going to have that jamming,
Yeah.
that's going to be killing. And so it's not really truly shy, but just a little bit less. So That's one thing I'd like to point out is know what the destinations are and consider doing more than one mix.
Yeah, and Synth Addict actually has a really good quote that he said he found. Somebody said, "Don't overmix. You can make things a little too raw. Let some dynamics pop out, and don't be safe. Perfect is not perfect," and that's 100% true as well.
Yep. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, technically perfect mix or whatever, and it may sound really, kind of flat or just boring.
Yeah.
I think that's it, Chris. Back to what just using the balance word again. If everything is perfectly balanced and just flat, then it is going to sound flat. It's not going to have anything that's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
You want some things that are kind of, whoa, what the hell, it's coming at me right there.
And one of the things that you kind of see nowadays, well, I don't know how. I think it's kind of toned down a little bit, but there used to be this whole loudness wars thing where people were just taking all the dynamics out of their music, and everything was like at max volume the whole time. So, and when you do that, like, I think when you do that and everything's all kind of the same level, you lose the punch in the track for the parts that need to be loud and the parts that you want to be quiet. So when you're guiding the listener, if everything's just all the way up here, you kind of have nowhere to go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
absolutely, yeah, and that flattens it out too.
Yeah.
Well, that makes me want to talk just for a moment about the difference between mixing and mastering, because a lot of times, I mean, if you're sending a mix off to be mastered, you need to leave headroom. You need to leave them room to work and bring the loudness up in a way that they're going to have different tools than you have if they're a mastering engineer, which is something I know I can sit there and kind of do fake mastering touches and make things louder and a little more compressed, and then find about the frequencies that are annoying when you start to do that. And it's really, that's a whole different mindset. But yeah, mixing, knowing that your goal is it's going to go to a mastering engineer, leave them room to work. Don't just push everything all the way out because you can with an L1 limiter or something. You just want to leave them a few dB at the top so they can do their thing. So that's something else I would like to say just about the overall philosophy of doing a mix.
Yeah, leave some headroom for the mastering engineer if you're going to send it off to a mastering engineer.
Right.
Although that would be good advice also if you're doing your own album, because you record whatever 12 songs or something, and then you leave yourself room so that even if it's just you coming back to all those songs, that the balances that you need to have between the tracks, there's that room that you talked about that you can go, okay, well, I can bump this up and move this down or adjust the EQ spectrum of this track to fit in well with the other ones. That's still really good advice.
Yeah. And that is what I do. I have one in Pro Tools on my master section. I have several plugins that are just disabled and they're just sitting there. So the first thing I'll do is go by and get a nice mix that I like, do whatever rides I want to do, make choices of what's staying, what's getting muted, what's going away altogether, what's important, do all of that, volume rides and everything else, get the tones all together, make it as balanced as possible. Then I'll go back and turn on my little set of, quasi mastering plugins that'll just make it hot, just a heated mix. And then from there, it's amazing how, you learn a lot about, drums are coming up now. And, or, it's going to start bringing certain things out. And then you go back and adjust your overall mix. But like you're saying, Chris, you've left the headroom for yourself too, so you can get over there and not squash the life out of it. So I hear so many mixes that people just think that's what they need to do is just compress everything. And I just, only if it's really not sitting or you're losing the track at parts, I'd never, minimum compressing really. Just on the end, I'll do maybe 3 dB or something kind of a little more intense.
Yeah. Let me ask a question, because as I was thinking about it this week, this is something that I thought might be relevant. So I come from more of a rock background, and thinking about just in general, like rock and pop, and we could put country in there as well, and those forms of music. What makes electronic music mixing different from those. And as I said, I was thinking about myself because when I approach mixing, I mean, I do use a lot of different instruments in it, and so I thought about it when this topic came up. One of you guys suggested it. I don't remember, but I was starting to think, what is it that would make electronic music distinct from those? And I was kind of curious as to what you guys would say about it.
So I haven't done a whole lot of mixing in other genres. I have a little bit, but it's been years. And so I don't really know. I mean, for me, like when I have to work with stuff like guitars, I get a
Mm-hmm.
little bit frustrated because I can't make them sound good. But with the electronic stuff, for me, it's all about you got to have your percussion dialed in and your bass, and then from there, making use of the stereo field and just making sure everything's kind of blending together. Because my goal when I make a track is to be able to eventually, at some point in there, hit you with a giant wall of sound, but have it sound good. So, uh,
Yes.
but it's really important for me in my mixing to make sure that the percussion is solid and up front. Like I want you to be able to hear the kick and hear the hi hats and hear the crashes and stuff. Sometimes that can get lost in the mix a little bit.
So
Yeah.
like some of the distinctive. So like having drums be very forward or a big wall of sound. I mean that could be said about a lot of rock stuff as well.
Sure, but in rock stuff, I don't hear kicks like I hear in electronic music.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And it's a lot of synth bass instead of stringed bass. It's a little different in terms of the timbre that you get, and I think
Definitely.
I think your focus in rock is completely different than what it is in electronic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the challenges of mixing synth bass are really different from the challenges of mixing a 4, 5, or 6 string bass, electric guitar kind of bass, and that's really important. I will actually go in and almost always right at about 33 hertz or something, right at the very thereabouts, 33, 34. I'll do a cut because it'll start to get muddy if you keep everything that's in beyond that. So I definitely start shaving away the super sub stuff because
Mm-hmm.
in a synth bass track, in an electronic track with synth bass, it's going to be jamming. And so you don't want a bunch of slop down there either. And you got to figure that kind of music is going to get played back through big systems with, subs, lots of subwoofer information. But it's real easy. And if you have a stereo bass track, you might consider changing that, like processing the sides differently even, and figuring out where that little, I like to look, not only shaving the subs of a bass, like a synth bass especially, because that's extra challenging to me, but I try to try to boost around in the frequencies in this sort of upper mid or mid for sure area, and find something that sort of brings out the higher frequencies of it, but without making it sound high-endy. It's bringing out overtones that are going to sit like it's almost the octave above overtone kind of area. If you can find that in your synth bass, then it just helps it to cut through. It lives in a place that's other than just way at the bottom only.
Yeah, that's I think one of the it's a fairly easy thing to do, but what is often lost on beginners because you think that bass needs to be real bassy, but you're not giving the listener information to tell what the pitch is. Because sometimes when you have the bass really low there, you feel it, but you not so much hear where it's sitting, what pitch it is. And especially if you mentioned before, like if somebody's listening on their phone, they're not going to get all the low fundamental tones. So having some harmonics that either are the root note or at least imply the root note of the bass can, definitely help give it definition, right?
Yeah, it helps it cut through for sure, and still and feel like it's bassier than it really is. It's kind of just like a
Mm-hmm.
psychoacoustic moment, where it's not really you're not really hearing all that low end, but you sort of feel like it. Like with a kick drum, what a lot of high end does for a kick drum is
Yeah.
sort of simulates that. It makes your brain think, oh, there's low end there, and it's real counterintuitive, but it does. When you put that
Yeah.
point on a kick, it really makes you think it's like, duh, like it's down there too, you know.
Yeah.
So one
Also, the percussive element of it too, with that little bit of smack on the top end, it lets you know, hey, the note just happened.
Yeah. Yeah, which is the whole kind of cool thing about how side chaining was developed anyway, right? For especially with bass and kick drum, is to
Yeah, 100%.
get the bass off the kick for a second, so the
Yeah.
kick can come through, and
A
then
little bit of room. Yep.
yeah, so which is a
And
pretty brilliant thing.
I mean, one of the big things for me in it is I will layer bass. So I usually don't just have one bass sound in my tracks. Like I'll have a sub bass, and I like to use a straight up sine wave. And I'll make sure my kick is tuned to whatever the root note is in the track. And that sine wave and the kick, you do a little bit of side chaining there, and you get plenty of room in that. And you can layer on top your kind of, I call it like mid bass, I guess, like what you're going to hear through a phone speaker, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're going to hear. But the sub bass is in there for if somebody is listening in a car or on a bigger system. So it's still there, but you have a little bit more control over the separation in the frequencies there. And then with the side chaining, you're able to fit in things like your kick drum. And I don't know if they do stuff like that in rock music. Like I have no idea if they layer bass or if they're just doing straight up string bass and that's all they do. Really, maybe some EQ. I don't know what they do. Do you guys know?
Cryss, take that one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would depend on the situation because I think with a lot of rock bands, it would the interplay of dynamics would be the kick drum and the bass guitar. And if you have keyboards, then where are they going to, the low end of the keyboards, where are they going to fit in? I'm trying to think. There are some examples of bands using both synth bass and bass guitar. In fact, there is was it? I just heard one the other day, and I was noticing it because I think it may have been Chick Corea, maybe that was doing. Was it Chick Corea or Herbie Hancock? I don't remember. Anyway, it was an older track, and there was some like really nice, cool. I don't know, it was Mini Moog or something. I don't remember. Bass line going on, and then there was a dude playing a Fender. I don't remember what it was, P bass or something, along with it. But you could tell that they had worked it out, and that they weren't just doubling. I guess that was the thing, is they weren't just doubling it as you were talking about how you're stacking it. For that track, they had some interplay between the two parts, which was a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I don't know. What would you? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I was just thinking about, and then pop music too. So like electronic music, straight up like that, EDM even, and then rock and roll. That's definitely got a lot of low end, but it's mostly bass guitar, and then and then just separating parts out like that. What a great idea, right? Just because you can have like the bass do a low thing, and just like the guitar, or rather the synth, like just hit a note, right? And then the bass guitar could kind of play a riff around it, and then boom, you could do another note, right? And then there's just like thinking the part through so everything speaks is really, really important, and that takes a little bit longer. But I love this. Turn the bass down, TB. Okay, now turn it down on the TB.
So that would be a reference to Metallica's "And Justice for All," in which
That's hilarious.
I remember that.
Lars and James had a little too much say in the sonic spectrum of the album, and you couldn't really hear the bass.
Yeah, they cut all the bass out, basically.
Yeah, no.
That's not balanced, at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, layering it is great, right? And then finding frequencies to boost to bring out various overtones is great, and then chaining is great, or then mixing up different basses and just writing parts for them to come through at different moments. All of those are great ways to deal with it. And then don't be afraid to like pull the bass out for a second. I mean, do something dramatic and make it fall out, right, and go away, and then boom, when it comes back, it's like, good Lord, yes.
Well, and even then, when you pull the bass out, sometimes that's a good way to check the rest of the mix as well.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Mute stuff and listen to it like in groups.
Yeah.
For sure. Listen.
One of the interesting things, I guess, is with like hip hop and rap music that where things that occupy similar ranges have kind of morphed one to another. And so, of course, thinking about like the 808 sound, which was a synthesized kick drum sound in essence, but then how that became to be like the bass and the kick drum together, and how it's been used in music. And it kind of seems like a cheat, but it's also kind of brilliant in that, and some of those forms of music that like you're not having to worry about competing kick and bass on it because it's just one thing that's doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a built-in thing. That's right. Which is great. It sounds amazing. And that's sort of the idea with a lot of the bass and kick drum parts anyways, that they're right, playing exactly the same thing together, Mm-hmm. But then the side chaining moment of that is the exact opposite, right? But yeah, that's a great example, Cryss. Yeah. And I'm always, while we're on low end, I'm always concerned about how much low end does the bass part have and how much low end does the kick drum have, and which is more important to have that low end, because you could take those two tracks, like a bass part and a kick drum part. You could take those two tracks and make flop them, like make the bass part really heavy, mm-hmm. and make the kick drum a little more mid-rangey, and just not even get very, very low at all, maybe not even below like 200 hertz or something. There's not really a lot of low information, but they might just marry up just great, together like that. Or the opposite could be true, and you start shaving off a lot of that extreme low end on a synth bass part, and then let the kick drum have all the low end. Maybe it's the driving thing. So its choices are like so important in mixing, and knowing what you want to be important. So
it's like the sculpting portion. You're there, mm-hmm. fitting all the parts together and making this sculpture kind of thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. But it's the sound, you're sculpting all the sounds to fit what your goal is.
Yeah, I mean, like metaphorically, if we're dealing with a painting, I've kind of tended to like that analogy in that, well, you can't in that one corner of the painting, you can't put the lake, the big trees, the deer, the moon, the clouds. You can't put them all in that one corner. You gotta put them in the different places. Right. And
well, you can, and it would just it would just look like an access virus where all the controls are on one side and you got the left over.
But one of the things that got me thinking about that, I've mentioned this before, but I really love how they have. I think it was with Guitar Hero, where they redid some of the masters of these songs and the tracks, and then you could hear the isolated parts, not pulled out with RX9 or whatever, but actually just the full isolated recording, how the tone was of it. And one of the examples, I mean, I've heard bunches of them that I just love them all. Or those videos where they've been in the studio and they're, the classic albums, going through how these tracks were made, and they're soloing them, like talking about the tracks. Same idea, but one that was really influential and actually helped me to start mixing a lot better was Tom Sawyer by Rush, which incidentally has synth and and drums and guitar and bass, and it was listening to the bass track because I was having such a hard time mixing in the beginning, it's not like I had a super tubby sounding bass. I had a Fender Jazz bass at the time, so it was a good sounding bass, but I was mixing it with so much low end, and that was having a really difficult time. And so when I heard Tom Sawyer and Geddy Lee's bass sound, I was really kind of shocked. I was like, well, where's the rest of it? And it was so lacking in lows. I mean, it was a very clacky, it was a bit overdriven. It's got all the snarl of, that a Rickenbacker bass should have in the classic Geddy Lee sound. And, or it was a jazz bass. It was either the jazz bass or the Rick, doesn't matter. But it showed me, it's like, that was one of my favorite bass tracks at the time. And I was really shocked about how it sounded isolated. And so sometimes, with what we were just talking about and where you set things in the track, if you got big guitar and big drums, you can have a bass that's a little bit more pointy in that. If we're talking rock music, but the same thing would apply to electronic music too. Or you can find, again, those different places where to put it. But sometimes the lesson is you can't EQ it that every element is going to sound good, just like you would dial it up by itself, but you have to make it work in the mix. So that lake being over the corner might look great, but once you have a bunch of trees and forest that you have to put there also, you got to make a decision which gets moved out of the way.
And I think I think I hear that a lot sometimes in people's mixing, where they're trying to stuff the full spectrum in their pad sound while they are trying to make a song. And it's like, you're going to have to cut some frequencies there to make that sound right. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it's exactly, it's going to be so muddy and not have its own place in the mix. It'll be smeared and muddy.
Stepping on everything else then, yeah. Exactly.
Right. Which that's just a great basic point, and I guess, like, philosophically, what I like to do, especially if it's not a track that I've created, if I get a chance to mix someone else's music, one of the first things I do is just kind of pull all the faders up to where I can hear everything just sort of at a nominal moment, and then just listen for ideas. I start immediately listening. All right, what's important here, and what could maybe go away? Like right there, those things are really competing, and you can kind of hear that early on if you just do kind of a static mix and pull everything up.
Yeah.
So I'd like to throw that out as just a strategy for, like, a starting point.
Yeah, exactly. Do you find that when you're working on your own stuff, because it's usually a process, and some of us mix as we make the track as well, then we end up going back anyways. Do you end up getting to that point where you're done and you want to start mixing, where you pull all the faders down to 0 and then just bring them up one at a time and try and kind of get that rough mix kind of dialed in? Do you do anything like that? Either of you guys?
Cryss?
Yeah. So a few doors down, I have a neighbor that built a little recording studio into his garage, and I was kind of surprised when when he moved in, got that stuff done, and I was kind of seeing his. We're about the same age, and we've been playing music for about the same amount of time. So, his thing was with tracking, like, he would do, like, really nothing but just the basics of moving a fader volume and nothing else until he had recorded every single part. And he, was like militant about it, like would not touch anything. Like, I'm going to track it. I'm going to track it. Then I'm going to mix. And I guess that was a strategy that worked for him. For me, it was not as satisfying of a strategy. So I do try to find, because you can't do a super amount on mixes while you're in the production part of it, but you can kind of help. To me, it's like, how is what you've already put down in even that rough mix? how are you, the musician that's playing to that track, how is it going to make you respond? So to me, like, some mixing, some basic elements of mixing are important in the tracking stage, for my work perspective, because it keeps it aesthetically pleasing. That helps me want to continue working on it. And then even if I have to go back and undo some of those things and do more rebalancing when I get to the mixing stage, that's okay for me because it helps me keep me interested in it. What would you say, Tim?
I have definitely done all of the above. Both ways. And it just depends. If it's my music and something I'm creating, then I'm mixing it as I go. And I'm making production choices already based on that's going to sit in the mix nice. Like, I'm already thinking about that, and that's part of why I make the choices musically that I do. So definitely I'm mixing as I go, especially when it's my stuff. If it's not my stuff, you don't know what you're going to get, right? So I'll do that little static mix tricks or trick rather, and then pull everything down. But even with my own things, if I've been mixing as I go, but somehow get spun out towards the end, I have definitely just said, all right, nope, they're all going down.
Yeah, I've run into that where I think I'm
fun.
doing an amazing job. You know what I mean? And then I'll listen to a reference track or even something that I've done previously that's finished, and I'll be like, yeah, okay, we're going to start over from zero, everything down, one at a time. What's going on? Maybe I got too much stuff going on. Maybe I need to cut a melody or a sound like completely out. Especially in that process, like there are times, it doesn't happen all the time, but there are times where I have just started over on the mix.
Totally from scratch. Yep. And, and on that subject, like, as far as sometimes if you do have to pull all faders down, it's, the adage that crap in, crap out, is really true. If you're trying to mix, a bunch of audio that doesn't want to be together to begin with, or that someone didn't put together very thoughtfully when they were tracking it, that's going to be a really challenging mix, and you're gonna probably pull the faders down maybe a couple of times before
pull the faders down and break out the EQs, man. You're cutting all kinds of stuff out.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Cut. I always like, the philosophy for me is always cut before boost. If something isn't coming through, if a part isn't coming through, don't just immediately grab the treble knob and start turning it up. Like, find the muddiness in the mid range and pull that back, and now you've effectively turned the high end up, and then just turn that track up just a little bit.
And sometimes it's something as simple as turn your hi-hats down.
Yeah, like like on that last thing we were working on, I had some pretty loud hats going on in there.
Well, the thing is like those take up a lot of the high end, and it can, like, I found, like, for me, like, I try and mix, like, the percussion, the high end percussion, like the hi-hats, even the claps and snares are actually quite low in terms of volume in my mixes. But I try and get them to sit in there with a little bit of compression and some other little tricks. But I've sometimes, if you have those a little too high and it's interfering with some other stuff, like in terms of level, that can cause some problems too. And I've ran into that before, or something. It's like, it's not, something's wrong, and all it is your hi-hats are a little too loud. Pulling them down a little bit.
Yeah. It's easy.
One of the things that I was thinking about again on this most recent track that we've been working on that's not out yet, is in mixing. So I didn't. Tim's mixed the track, and when we finish a part, we just, quickly, 2 minutes or whatever, like, just output a mix that just shows what the parts we did, so everybody can hear it just right away. And nothing goes into that really. It's not a mixed thing, but it's just like, oh, here's it with the part that I added. And as I was thinking about that, because I had used some stacked tracks, or like, it'd be like busing. And in Logic, there's some stuff that you can do, and I imagine other DAWs have it too. But I was using these sets of basically track folders that I started stacking things into just for the ease of working with the track as I was adding multiple different elements to it. And it got me thinking about if you get to that point where you're really frustrated with the mix, which I was not with this, as I was working on the song, but it gave me an idea in that I was thinking like, if there's something that's not working, and that whole idea of pulling things down and restarting, but you can sometimes run into problems if you go through the process in the same order. You kind of get back to you make the same decisions and you get back to roughly the same position that you were before. But having some things that in audio spectrum, fit together, like the kick and the bass, like the bass synth or whatever, like having those where you can pull other parts of the mix down really quickly and hear how those parts work together. You're like, there may be a problem that's being masked by another part of the track. Like you don't realize it's a problem because there's other things that are going on that are filling things out that maybe they're not interfering with that kick and bass synth, but the kick and bass synth are interfering with one another. You just need to pull away everything else just a little bit to have a peek at it.
100%. Yeah.
This topic is so incredibly full of little fingerlets that go everywhere. Like as we're talking about stuff, it just like,
and you just start thinking of stuff.
Yeah,
it's not only that, like some of it is your ears too. Like you have to be able to hear what's going on. And like I said earlier, having a set of monitors that can get you as wide of range on that frequency spectrum as possible without. And at least for me, like I've just been mixing with the same set of monitors since 2006. So like I know them really well. They're not the flattest things on the planet. My room's not treated. But when I compare stuff with reference tracks, I know how stuff's supposed to sound on these. So kind of get used to what you have. But as long as you can hear the frequencies, you can make some decisions there too.
Yeah, as long as you know your room and know what your monitors are doing and what typically happens, how they interpret things, and then that just sort of becomes part of your internal gauge. You just know, right, it should be a little bit high-endy, because that actually means it's probably not, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You just get to know your room. And I was thinking about, there's so many like little points, but like when you're EQing, like two things for level mixing, for placement like that, I turn my monitors down. I turn them down to like 40 dB or 45 dB or something like that as the output. And I find that I can make way better level choices, volume choices, when the overall level is down like that.
Yeah.
But not true at all for EQ, because of how your ear perceives, especially low end. The softer that is, the less low end that your ear will hear. So that's just the Fletcher-Munson curve, right? That's what they call that. So for EQing, it's the exact opposite. Turn it up like 85 dB or 87 dB or something like that. Get it full and loud and make EQ choices that way, because your ear will hear more full range of frequencies that way when it's louder. So that's kind of two different little tricks that I use a lot, that it's just the way your ear perceives things. But I can really do level choices much better when the monitors are turned down a little bit. And then when you turn it up, it's like, oh yeah, great. Yeah, everything's kind of fitting nice.
What about doing things like mixing in mono? Have you guys done anything like that? Do you guys employ any? Because I've heard some people say it's essential. I don't know.
It's enlightening. If you collapse your mix to mono, it's enlightening. It might show you phase problems. It might show you choice problems again about having too many parts in there at one point or something. It's enlightening, but nobody really listens on mono anymore. So it's more of a it's just more of a.
Are clubs still pumping mono though? Do they run mono signals through those?
Like a lot of the clubs, I don't know, like around the world, but I think it's all kind of a stereo world anymore.
Okay.
Unless it's like a live band, you're not going to really hear like guitar placement stuff going on or anything, right?
Right. But yeah, but I mean, yeah. So I guess as a mixing technique, though, you can use collapsing the mix to mono to check for phase issues and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. You can hear stuff will start disappearing and whatnot.
Yeah, and for EQ choices, that could be kind of a helpful thing, like finding out, because you may have some hard panned elements that are out here, but they're conflicting with something that's in the center, but it's harder to observe that way. But once they're collapsed the mono, I see they've got that same band there that's just clashing. I don't tend to do it a lot, but it is, I think, again, it's a tool for the toolbox.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. It's one more way to check, to see how things are stepping on each other, and it'll kind of tell you what you need to do a lot of times. But I honestly, I rarely do that anymore. I kind of learned what to watch for in that way, and so I don't really collapse things down to mono anymore. But I will do some pretty radical panning. That also, then how about this, guys? Like when everything is in stereo, like how much of a nightmare is that? Like,
that's part of the choices, right?
Yes.
You want to have some stuff wide. You want to have some stuff like in the middle. So if we're talking about the canvas of sound that you're painting, you can't have everything out here and nothing here.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's a simple thing, but it's so true. So if there's a couple of stereo pads, I will definitely, kind of move one side of it's down here and the other side of it's panned about straight up, and then pan the other one the opposite way. So you're still getting a little bit of information from both of them on both sides, but they're favoring a side.
Sure.
And so that's just super helpful. Don't be afraid to collapse a little bit of the stereo field right there, because you're getting a stereo field anyway, because you have two different sounds going on each side. But that's I
find that's a good way to get certain things to fit sometimes, is by utilizing that stereo field appropriately.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you have everything mono, this is like a mistake I made very early on, is I did everything mono. I didn't understand I had some guy tell me, "Oh, this sounds pretty good, but you need to use a stereo field more." And I'm like, "What the hell is he what are you talking about? It's going out both channels, That's I didn't understand what he was saying. I was pretty much putting everything right in the middle.
Yeah. There was a band that I was in, and we had a rehearsal studio in an industrial complex, and one of our buddies was his dad was a musician, and he didn't really play, but he had really enjoyed recording his dad and stuff. And so he's like, "I'd really like to record you." And he had a Pro Tools setup and stuff. So he had this room built in the studio, our rehearsal studio, so that he could record. And so here, when it came to his first mix of, recording we're tracking, and I didn't have to do any sort of mixing or anything. I was just having fun being a lead guitarist. And then it came out, and I'm listening to it was a funny thing, because I had done all these things that he didn't quite understand. Like, okay, here's the first rhythm track. Here's the second rhythm track. And, I think I actually did like 4 rhythm tracks. And then we got the mix back, and they were all 4 distorted guitar parts in mono. And I recorded a mono, but with the intention of and so here's kick drum, bass guitar, snare. I think the hi-hat might have been a little bit to the side. Vocal, they're all stacked in the center. I'm like, well, this isn't going to work, man. It's like, you need to hard pan the guitars. Like, I think had him hard pan one set, and then the next set mixed a little bit lower and pan just a little bit. And because there are 4 separate tracks, they weren't stereo guitar tracks. There were 4 mono tracks panned into stereo. The variations from that makes it sound very full and thick, but it also got my guitars out of the way for the lead vocals.
Yeah.
And
you can do that same technique with mono synths.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I've done that plenty of times.
Absolutely. That's what you do. Yeah. Because you're still getting a stereo image now. They're
Yeah.
different. They're just, even though they're mono sources, they're 4 different mono sources, but you're placing them in different spots. And I love it when there's something slightly panned to one side and it's the focal point of the mix right then. And there's nothing kind of on the other side a little bit. I really like that. It's exciting to me to have it a little off to one side. It's a little, it kind of gets your attention. And I dig that
Yeah.
instead of, if it's a mono thing, just putting it down the middle because it's mono. I still like it to be a little to one side, even if you don't have counteracting stuff right on the other side.
Yeah. So Brian brought up a point, and this is something that is a real shocker if you've been listening only to modern music. But in the '60s, a lot of the mixes were really odd. If you go back to some of the Beatles mixes, they have great mixes, but sometimes the choices that they make are strange. Like you'll have the band on one side and you'll have all the voices on another. It's weird stuff like that, or a panned bass guitar.
Well, I mean, in a lot of that, in their case, they weren't mixed that way. They were mixed in mono, right? And so that's why when they came back and did the stereo thing, that was just how they decided to do it, because they'd already mixed it in mono. They were mixed for mono, right? And so then when stereo came out, they were like, well, I don't know, just put stuff way over here and stuff way over there, right?
Yeah, well, and some of it I think was just largely the experimental nature of like late '60s musicians and recording. And so, I mean,
sure.
think like for all these years they were listening to stuff in mono, and all of a sudden stereo starts becoming a really big thing. And you listen to some of those early Hendrix records. There's a lot of use of panning things around. So the guitar solo starts and it all of a sudden it dives right, and then it's swirling around to the left and to the right, and you're like, well, this is crazy. You don't really hear that stuff as much in modern mixes anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found that I'm kind of rediscovering some radical panning these days myself. I could sound
actually,
cool.
that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up, because those were some of the most interesting parts of your mixes, and I think it was the latest song too, like where you've used panning to create excitement for a part. I don't know, maybe if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I found that, a lot of times, especially like an arpeggio or something, if you just slightly are pushing it back and forth slowly like that, not too extreme, especially assuming it's a stereo source even, and just kind of gently pushing it back and forth, that adds a really nice thing, and it helps it to come out. It helps it to speak more than if it's all just sitting in that same spot, and then you have some sort of pad or something with it too. And on the Truth and Consequences track, I did a couple of things with guitar too, where if you hit a chord and let it decay and you had the whammy bar, something, I would just kind of slightly, as it's decaying, I would just kind of slightly let it drift, and then it comes back right before the next hit, and then kind of do it again. Anything that, gives it some excitement and some drama. It's fun. So panning's cool. And on my jams, I've really been just having a lot of fun kind of throwing stuff around, almost in a not wacky way, but like in very much a statement kind of way. Like, yeah, I'm panning stuff. Yes, that's what I'm doing, and I like it.
I was going to ask you guys something. Continue.
Yeah, there's a interesting plugin. I didn't get it, but I thought the idea for it was interesting, and so it uses an envelope follower, so it's tracking the volume of your signal, what you're feeding to it, and then it applies an envelope to that that will do dynamic things like change the panning, or also affect things in the stereo field. And I don't remember what it's called. Maybe somebody remembers, but so you could have something like whatever, something that a snare or something. I probably wouldn't do a snare, but just as an example, something that has a hard transient hit, but just a little bit of tail to it. And so it would hit in the center, and then it would kind of slide off to the side as it decayed. Things like that, but it automated.
Yeah. That's cool. I love that. Yeah, that's interesting and get your attention. I can, if you want to, while we're on panning, if you, Cryss, if you want to bring up my screen share, I can show my Pro Tools mix of that track. Oh, it looks like maybe I. Oh, you know what? I bet I have to reshare it because I opened up a couple of plugins. I'm not seeing them on the screen share we have there.
Okay. Do you want? So I'll remove this and you'll reshare it.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just redo it here. Yeah, it's just a couple of cool plugins that I use. Let's see if it's going to show them. Yeah, right. Try that.
Let me put up.
Nope, they're not showing up. I don't know why that is. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, I'll just tell you about them then. I don't know why it's doing that. One is called Brower Motion.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Yeah, and it does, it sort of has like a quasi around front and back and left and right feel to it, which is cool. And then it also has in the center of it, the graphic interface is great. I wish I could show you. And then it has just like a super hard pan straight back and forward, left and right. And so I definitely put that on. Let me see what I used it on that Truth and Consequences track. It was Jamie's Prophet track, which is that is the arpeggio thing that happens at the front. So I used it on that, and then I used, let's see, I got some others. Pan Man by Sound Toys. You guys know of that one?
I haven't used it, but I know of it.
That's another really good one that you can use an LFO on it, or you can have rhythmic steps or ping pong or random or whatever. So the shapes of it are variable, which is, you can get some interesting results with that. I'm sorry, I don't know why the screen share didn't work. I'm seeing it here, but oh well. Anyway,
well, it's nice. One of the advantages of having, DSP and plugins is that there's so many of these things that they, in the past, they could do or work around, but now it's so much easier to do it. I mean, think about some of those classic, like Dark Side of the Moon or something, where there's elements that are kind of flying around your head. Well, I mean, you can have in a stereo field things just going back and forth, but to get it to sound like it's going around, you need to adjust the phase elements of it also, which is not impossible, but it's a lot harder to do, and you have a bunch of people twisting knobs and doing things and adjusting the EQ and that kind of stuff at the same time.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. That's how it was done. Yep. A bunch of hands on the board, man. Like 8 hands or 10 hands on the board. It's crazy.
And then like 5 of them are high out of their mind, and you're trying to make it work. And like,
oh man, did you hear that, man?
Sorry, I missed my move, man. You just had the one move you had to do right at chorus 2. Come on. Oh, sorry, man. I missed it.
Sorry, man.
Yeah, because I think there's like
we got to do the whole thing.
There's panning. There's the phase shift of things moving around. There is the equalization that also happens, like brighter things in front, darker things in back, as well as things moving in the field, to be adjusting your reverb to reflect that as well. No pun intended.
Now, I was going to ask you guys, this is what I remembered I was going to ask you earlier. Do you guys do any fader automation for levels for different sections throughout the track? You guys use limiters instead? Like, how do you guys handle some of the dynamics in your mixes?
Let me go first, just because Tim's so much better at this than I do. Yes, and if I really need to start putting more time into my mixes for stuff that I pop up on the YouTube, because there's so many things. Like I'm like, all right, I'm done with the song. I'm just gonna put it up after like a 20-minute mix. Like, it sounds good enough, and I know what I need to do, and I know what the next couple hours would be. I just don't want to sit and do it. Just, I'm not putting on an album or anything. So, but I'm using volume animation, panning animation, all that kind of stuff more and more, and I do think that's one of the big secrets. It's one of the subtle secrets, I get, or subtle things that make the track sound really good. That it's the kind of things that's not like a bunch of reverb or something or chorus that are just like there in your face. It's the subtle things that you don't know that it's happening but it is, and that's what subtly, like in a lot of rock music, coming, the verses will be maybe starting at a fairly medium volume, and you'll taper it down like the whole mix just a little bit until it hits the chorus, and all of a sudden it jumps back up and then keeps going down like that, so that you have those dramatic elements. And it sounds like the song keeps getting louder at every chorus. You're like, how can this be? But it's kind of an illusion of it. But this is really, where I think, hearing the mixes Tim has done, where he's used volume and animation to really a great effect.
Let's see. We might try this again. I don't know. Because if I can share this other screen, I do use volume automation all the time. Absolutely. And a lot of times I'm ducking things as much as I'm boosting things, but
right.
Even when a second element comes in, just to duck something just a little bit, not much.
Yeah.
A dB and a half, just enough to kind of sits back away just for a second, lets that other part come through. And so, yeah, I do rides all the time. And for fade outs or fade ins, Cryss, that second bass part that you did on this Truth and Consequences track, you had it coming right in, and it was really a cool spot where you chose. But I just kind of did a little fade in on it. So, because there's not a whole lot of other elements there, and you can kind of just feel it swelling a little bit. Mm-hmm. And automate drums, absolutely. I'll definitely like move them all around. Maybe bring, if it's a low part in the song, I'll definitely pull those drums back a little bit to make them. It just kind of gives more dynamics to the track. So I spend a lot of time actually, probably. On my own stuff, I'll really mess with it a lot, but it depends. It all depends on how much time you have to do the track, right? But,
yeah.
But I mean, I love using automation because that just really makes things come out or sit right where they need to. Yeah.
And I've seen the guys that do the film scoring or orchestral type mixing.
Yeah.
They'll do a lot of that automation for levels and stuff. It's pretty. I mean, they probably spend hours doing that, and it's crazy because they're working with like sometimes hundreds of tracks.
Right.
They're
probably grouping those big time, which leads me to this. I don't know why this bothers me. People call things stems that are not stems. So there are tracks that are individual audio files these days, but like an individual track. And then there are stems, and stems comes from the movie world, and it is subgroups of like items mixed together. So if you ask for like a violin stem, that they're going to give you just the violins of a particular track. Let me have the
group of violins. Right?
Yeah, so it's like there's subgroups, and people always seem to refer to tracks now, even though they're meaning just individual multi-tracks. They'll call them stems, and it's really it's kind of funny because it's not what it is. But I don't know. I just had to bring that up because sometimes I see people say that, and I go, no, that's not it. But okay, never mind. It doesn't really matter, honestly, but like, it's a subgroup.
Yeah.
Let me take a kind of a hop off of Marshall's question there. So, playing with bands for so many years, one of the things, and especially if you're playing live, your sound man is not doing a whole lot of automating of the mixed. I mean, if you get a good one, he might be just subtle things, bringing things. Oh, the guitar solo's coming up. We'll push that up a little bit. Oh, the singer needs to be like little subtle things, but nothing really major. Nothing like you would get in a recording. And so it really, really gets you thinking about how do I, as the musician, change the dynamic of the song, which is something that's probably a really important part. Like before you get to the mixing dynamics, you got to have your performance dynamics set up. Now with a lot of synth music, it's a little bit less dynamic in that kind of way. I was wondering how you guys would approach that before the mixing is done, where to create the dynamics. How are you guys creating the dynamics in your performances?
Yeah, I was going to say, so live mixing is like a completely different animal. Well, kind of. For me, I'm still using my same tools. I just use Ableton to process the audio as it's done live. So it's I guess in a way it's kind of the same, but because you can still, if you're really meticulous about it, you can program those automations in. You don't need Bob the sound guy over there doing anything anymore. But in general though, I don't really focus on as much of that in a live performance.
But what about when you're recording and you've got a monosynth sound that has not a lot of dynamics? How do you are you thinking about other ways to add it into your synth patch, or are you doing it by what you play and what you don't play? How are you creating the dynamics for recording?
Like recording stuff like a live performance.
No, just for anything. So my point was like that's
Okay.
what I came out of with with the live world. One of the lessons, like, you have to create some of the dynamics, but it also
I
can
got
be
you.
a great way, like for instance, like pulling out the bass guitar or something, like stopping playing, or with instruments like that, you can play softer, or you move your fingers away from the bridge and closer to the neck pickup on the bass, and
Yeah.
you'll get a softer, warmer tone, things like that, where you dynamically change the timbre and the volume of it. Are there strategies you guys use in recording for the performance part before the mix?
Yes, sometimes. Sometimes I'll play stuff in by hand, and then I'll fix it. Sometimes you lose some of that character in terms of a performance in that. But there are elements that I will use the live performance piece and maybe not change much of anything, and just sometimes just the way it's played is enough to give it some of that life, some of that dynamics.
Yeah.
I will definitely do and I'm not afraid to do it. The use of the filter, right, for on synths. Definitely, I will slowly open that up, or just do the different sections where it's the same sound, but maybe the filter's a little bit more open on the chorus or something like that, and then push it back. That's an easy, obvious way to create some dynamics in it, and in your track. Uh, definitely choices too. Again, or even like do the same part in a different part of the track with a different sound that's way brighter or more aggressive or something, right?
Mm,
Or even
Just
doubled up or something.
doubled up, yeah, or
yeah.
or completely even replay the same part but just with a different tone. So definitely just like envelopes, the amount, anything to kind of just push the timbre in a more nasty kind of way. But for me, it would, for electronic music and stuff that I create, it's music that I create. I'm always working on that as I go. So that's part of my process and decision making. And is this part working or necessary even? And if it's necessary, then what do I do to help it to stand out? And because I don't want to make choices that are kind of too much in the same timbre range,
Yeah.
or octave range, or there's so many different ways you can get dynamics that way too, right? Is play something a little bit lower, or go ahead and bump it up an octave or two and see what happens.
Hmm.
And then mute stuff. I love muting stuff because I'll throw a lot of stuff on the canvas and then kind of step back and go, wow, that's cool. But what happens if this initial part that I wrote the whole song around or something, not necessarily that radical, but literally like it's been this part that I've had in the song for a long time. What happens when I now remove that?
Yeah, just take that out. Yeah, I've
And
done stuff like that.
yeah, that's really
I've
interesting.
even had like happy accidents where I'm 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 trying to cut and paste some stuff for like percussion, winds up in the bass track or like some
Mm,
weird section, and I play
mm,
it back and I'm like, oh, you know what? That actually is pretty damn cool. I think I'm gonna leave that now.
totally. Oh,
Yeah.
the accidents are the best. You got to, that part of you has to always be listening and go, wait a second, that's actually cool, because
Yeah.
the guy that wants to just get it done is in there going, no, no, it's not. That was a mistake. Just fix
Yeah.
it.
Take that out. Take that
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the other guy
That's the
goes,
fun
no,
part when you're working on your own stuff with no deadline. You can kind of.
Yeah. It does kind of make a difference to work on other people's music. And I've enjoyed mixing other people's music because I think even though I'm trying to be as objective as possible with my own songs, some of those decisions, like I have a certain amount of I have too much attachment in my own music to certain parts, and I can kind of come at it in a little more detached way to mix some friends music or something like, yeah, what if I did just chop this section out here or totally invert the dynamics of it or whatever. Like that can be kind of a fun thing to do and push you, but then when you go back to your own tracks, you're like, what you did to that other song, you should probably do this. I know, but I don't want to.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where, especially if you're being commissioned or you're mixing for somebody else, they're kind of the boss. Because in the mixing process, you can make some very creative decisions that can really impact things. So you kind of need to stick with what the client wants in that case, right? But,
right. That being a whole different wazoo.
Yeah.
I was gonna. Well, you want to try sharing the screen that I have up there now, Cryss? Let's see if that's going to work. I'm sorry, I don't know what my situation was there. Yeah, that's working. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. So this is like, these are really. Let me kind of collapse everything down to small here at track size, but there we go. So yeah, so it's a lot of tracks on that. On that Truth and Consequences that we did, but like Cryss, right here is kind of where you're. Whoops, let's not do that. Right here is kind of where that bass part that you added came in, and I just sort of wrote it up so it just sort of fades in, which we can play. And then that's when my Hydrosynth part came in, which is doing a little rhythmic thing. I also kind of treated it the same way, so those two parts kind of work together as like, this is what's happening. What else have I got? I mean, obviously I'll fade stuff out. Like where's it? I saw something. Yeah, here's a spot where like this right here just got ridden down right through here. And just because it was probably getting in the way of this intro pad. So like, it's just like pulling it down just for the sake of example, just to reinforce what we were talking about. And then I do a lot.
In fact,
Yeah, that's exactly what I was asking.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
That's so that looks like it was like the Moog lead that I was doing, and then Jamie's part came back in.
Yeah.
And I think that I remember that. And so there would be like two of the examples of arrangement, like the recording, the production of it, and then the mixing parts kind of coming together. Because I think it finished out the phrase there, but it was just beginning to overlap that other part coming back in, and I remembered that I was going thinking about where this part would be, that some other parts were coming out, and then okay, here's where that solo is going to be. Now get out because the other things are coming back in again, and then your mix part of it took care of that last little bit to help it kind of duck out of the way a little more.
Yeah, the choices were great. Yeah, everybody on this I think made great choices. But right, yeah, that's that one little spot where I may have done something there, and then I did. Let's see, it's not a great example there, but that the weird little mangled drum stuff that I did that was using the qubit, the data bender.
Yeah, that's like my favorite thing that you did.
That
was
worked
like,
out
that's so cool. Yeah,
that worked out pretty cool. I was gonna, because what I did was I just let it roll the whole way. I want this to be waveform. Yeah, I let it roll the whole way, but then I went back, and let's see if I can get a better look at that. Yeah, you can tell like all these gray areas are where it's muted, and then the active ones here, and it's just like so it works just like as a little fill right there in that moment.
Yep.
Yeah.
But otherwise,
it's brilliant, man. I was like, wow, that's cool. That was really cool.
it worked out really, really, really cool. I like that device for that. I want to try it on some melodic things as well. I've only so far kind of messed with it on drums, but
It definitely is really cool for percussion. I watched some videos on it after you told me about it.
oh, right on, yeah.
Yeah. I was like, maybe that's how I can start taking that dive into modulars, get one of these things. I don't know.
I mean, yeah. Here's the Brower motion. Can you see that? I'm not looking at you guys right now.
Which one?
Oh, no, it didn't come out. So it's interesting. Like when I switch screens on Pro Tools, it does not follow it. So never mind.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, all good.
Oh, yeah. Maybe you're sharing just that one screen.
I think I'm just.
Whole desktop.
Did you share the app or did you share the desktop screen?
You know, it was just the screen, so that's what happened. Oh, that's all good.
Yeah, no, that's cool. At least we got to take a look at some of that. That's cool. Because we didn't. That's the first time we've seen any of that too. So
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Let's see. I've made a bunch of. I mean, again, this is what a deep well we're in with the mixing thing is just impossibly deep. There's just so much you can do with it. There's so many techniques, but yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
One of the things that I think is an important skill in mixing, but probably is not talked about, is just the ability to ask questions of a mix. And before you go down any of these other paths that we went down, you have to have the curiosity or the ability to kind of think critically about it and go, what's available to me right now? And some of that comes from experience. Some of it can come from inspiration and seeing other people do things that you like to hear and go, oh, maybe now let me try that technique in my own song. But it's kind of slowly building the library of that. And I think one of the advantages of modern music making is that there's so many tutorial videos on YouTube about how to do all this stuff, about how to use mixing tools, about how to mix, how to do this. But maybe some of the stuff that's not talked about enough is arrangement and how that plays an important part in mixing. But then also, building up a palette of techniques to be able to employ to fulfill the artistic vision of the song. And being a beginner can also have another problem in that there are so many options that I think they tend to try too many or work on too many things at once. And something that you had said earlier, Tim, about the static mix, it's like, well, that's a really great place to start for anybody and on any song. It's like, if you can get things sounding pretty good without any sort of movement in the mix, like that's a great place to be centered. And then you start doing the other things that are going to take it up that extra little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Static mix is like a big deal. That's that I don't know. There's something about just knowing, well, just because you know where everything is, right? And you know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And then you can go and start just lifting things or pulling them down or use an EQ to bring them out or push them back in or whatever you need to do.
I keep thinking that I need to make a document, a note or something with a lot of creative ideas, things that come across and make basically like a sort of checklist with different topics to go back and revisit my mixes with. Things I can start asking myself, because we get into the mode of mixing and we're kind of there and we're doing our thing and we're moving stuff around, but to have a kind of reflective look at it and go, okay, is there, question, is there something in the mix that I should take out? Is there something in the mix that should come out for certain parts and be in for other parts? Is there something, what is the stereo field looking like? It's like a checklist of things. I mean, so many of these things are, we intuitively do already, but I feel like there's some areas, especially in the creative mixing aspects, that I could probably benefit by keeping a record that I would just sit and look at and go, oh yeah, Yeah, I really like that. I really like what, Marshall did on that song. What would that be like in my song? Where would I use that technique? How would it be employed? That kind of stuff, which I don't think so many things they come across that you're like, oh, that's a good idea, but that's where it ends,
Well,
Right.
it's one of the ways that I've been able to improve through the time that I've been, trying to do music, is by taking bits and pieces that I hear other people talk about or give
Mm-hmm.
examples of, especially now with YouTube. I mean, it's crazy with all the YouTube stuff you can find now. We didn't have that back when I started. So I'm kind of jealous because people starting out now, you've got just a wealth of information that you can just dive right into. But yeah, I take little bits that I have that kind of stuck out to me. I'm like, that makes sense. So I'm going to try that next time. You know what I mean? And then I will. And then eventually the stuff that you like or that really seems to work just kind of sticks with you. Then it's almost like muscle memory. You just kind of do it every time then.
Yeah.
Marshall, do you have a go-to track or anything that you use for mix inspiration, or just to kind of get your ears set before you do a mix?
I will listen to. I probably need to update some of it actually because I have a lot. I haven't really bought a lot of new music, but I will use some old Dead Mouse stuff because I think he has, especially for the type of stuff I'm making. Like I'm trying to check for bass and other things,
Mhm.
and sometimes it can be really difficult to get that right. And having a good reference track to kind of play that off of, it's like, yeah, if I compare this to that and it sounds pretty good, like I think I'm in a good spot, and then I'll go test it on like a couple different systems as well. But yeah, some Dead Mouse tracks. That's pretty much it. Well, I should say I've used some when I started doing the psytrance stuff. I was using some Asterix, an artist named Asterix. He does some really great psytrance stuff. I was using some of his stuff as reference material.
Just to kind of get your ears set, right?
Yeah, saying this is kind of what it needs to sound like, and get me in the right zone. Get me in the ballpark. So then, especially when I'm going to do the final mix, and then I do my own mastering with Ozone, if you can call that mastering. But I will reference completed works by professional artists and see how my stuff stacks up next to that stuff. It's got to be similar genres, you know. I can't
Right,
be doing
right.
I can't be doing like retro wave, or something.
Right.
It's not gonna completely different. So yeah,
Yeah, A Bing mixes like that
yep.
is really, really,
And doing it by
really
guys,
important.
or ladies or whoever that is professional work that people that get paid to do it for a living, and so I use that, and it's one of the ways that I've been able to really adapt to my speakers, my monitors, and my room in here.
Hmm.
So I know what those things
Mm-hmm.
sound like. A professional mix. I know how it sounds in here, and it helps me make the right choices in the mixing process to try and get things dialed in.
Yeah.
So reference tracks are like extremely important, I think.
Mm-hmm.
They
Chris,
could
do you
also
have?
be very depressing though. Like
Yeah,
you think you're working
yeah,
on this great thing, you bounce it
yeah,
out, you listen to it, and then you're like,
yeah.
man, mine sounds like crap compared to that guy's. Sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. Well, I've been trying to work on a lot of different styles of music, so that becomes a challenge. So on some things like, you know, I'll try to hit some of the classics that will at least get me in the ballpark. Some classic albums that I just think are good sounding albums, and so I would think some of my go-to stuff that wildly vary, and this wouldn't be for electronic music as much. I would probably have to think a bit harder about that, but something one of my go-tos would be somewhat electronic, and that would be more of the modern Muse albums. So anything from like what the heck's the name of it? Crap, I don't even remember the title. The Resistance, whatever album that was. So stuff from about 10 or 12 years ago and on. because it's rock and electronic stuff together. It's modern. It goes to a pop market, and so there's a lot of elements that are at play in there that I like to check with. And so it's like, okay, well, when you're combining synthesizers and guitars, where are they sitting for them? Some of it's real drums, some of it's electronic drums, things like that, vocals. So it's kind of a good and complete picture. And then some of the classic albums, like if it's something that's more hard rock sounding, I might check out some of the old Mutt Lange stuff, like Hysteria or something like that. And there's a lot of 60s and 70s albums I like. The thing is that with some of the older that, the farther back you go, like they're really great sounding albums, but they are mixed with a different mindset and for a different audience. So sometimes that can be helpful and sometimes not. Like if you're going back and grabbing whatever Led Zeppelin 4, it's not going to thump as much as some modern stuff, but it's a great sounding album, or, things like that. So yeah, I try to find and not necessarily stuff that I would totally be listening to all the time, but try to find examples of things that other people have thought are classics and well done. Like when it comes to 80s synth pop, the world would like a ton. But then I'll go back and I'll listen to a handful of the classics and see like, okay, well, how does this measure up in that way? Well, what about you, Tim?
I do the same kind of things as far as I'll try to listen to something before I get started, and maybe I won't. It depends. But for electronic music, I do really like Dead Mouse mixes. Those sound really great. That really gets my head in it gets my head in the right zone every time. And then maybe about midway or 3/4 of a way through a mix, I might want to just do a check back in and see where I'm at close to that. And I like to get on like Apple Music, or that's what I usually use anyway, but it doesn't matter, any streaming service, and kind of look up Dead Mouse and then comparables, or find some other newer electronic music, and then just kind of reference those. I find that it gets me out of my rut for a second and helps me understand where I'm up against that. And then also, a lot of times you can find new music that way. So yeah, just like in a minute, and just take a break, take 10 minutes and go, oh, wow, that's really cool. And you make a note to come back to that, Yeah. So, and that's for like electronic music. There's a couple of classic records I think hold up really good for just sort of general band mixes that are, it wouldn't be rock and roll, but like the Sting 10 Summoner's Tale record has If I Ever Lose My Faith in You, that song. Yeah. That's just a great sounding record, like just for where things are placed and tones and overall mix for a band type thing. But it's totally genre dependent. Yeah, I don't want to be listening to that and making a rock record, that's for sure. But yeah, but that's a good sounding, cool record. And I'm with you, Chris, too. I think Muse is a really great band to listen to, and I would also recommend Mute Math. If you guys have heard of them.
I have.
That's a great band, and they do a lot of modern techniques, and modern production. The mixes sound really interesting, a lot of distorted drums, and it's very aggressive and cool and edited and goofed with, and it's really fun to kind of listen to one of those, and it's like, oh right, I'm thinking way too rigidly,
Mm-hmm.
I need to relax and have some fun too, because the mix is supposed to be fun and the music's supposed to end up cool. You just get so hung up in it, and all of a sudden you're just in this kind of thing of problems and weeds, and you need to look up and go, no, it's supposed to be like sounding cool and dramatic and exciting. And so it's funny, you have to step away from it sometimes, just like we were talking about in composition. Sometimes you just have to step away, and you come back and hear that mix completely different in like 10 minutes sometimes. It's weird.
Yeah.
One of the things that I appreciate, there's an overload of information which you have to sort through, but like having access to some of the great mixers of today on YouTube, and even if you're only getting them for 10 minutes, to see kind of what their mindset is can help break the rules for you. As you're mentioning, like I remember there's a clip with, I don't know if it was Chris Lord Alge or Tom Lord Alge, one of the brothers, and he was mixing a Muse song. And it was funny because he was getting to it, was like, oh, okay, yeah. And I mean, it was nothing subtle at all. And I was, as I was watching, I was a little bit shocked about it. And he's like, okay, yeah, these guitars, okay, we're just going to just crank the treble on these things. And we'll go with like, don't do that. But it was like crazy mixing decisions that, like, just all boost. Like we're gonna boost them like 10 decibels at whatever, and it's just gonna be blah. But to me that would have been kind of like a rash decision and somewhat foolish. And geez, why would But he made it work in the mix because he had some other bigger picture in his head, and to see that element come into it without knowing the bigger picture. Like, oh, well, that was a really creative decision that really most everybody would say was breaking the rules, but it was to really great effect.
Right, but so he was doing that in the mixing stage, right? He wasn't capturing like recording the guitars. Right. I hope.
Yeah. No.
But then if you got, this doesn't work, you can just clear it out, start over, and don't have to re-record everything.
Yeah, I mean, I love it when people are fearless in the mixing, and we kind of didn't really even talk about that. We're kind of talking about all the basic, like, standard things that you would do, right? And that's solid, good information. But sometimes be fearless, right? Do that, Cryss. That's just such a great point that you're making there with his decision making of just like doing something totally radical at some point that you wouldn't necessarily think to do, and you can always just bypass the effect later if it's not working.
Yeah, I mean, we can save multiple copies of our mixes, and that might be something to experiment with too. Go like, let me do a mix that I think sounds good, and then when I go to do a second mix, have the mindset of like, I've got something that sounds good and that's in the bank there. It's finished. Work on my own music. All right, now let's go nuts with this. Let's just play with it. Let's see how crazy I can go with this mix. And then maybe you'll end up with something that you go, okay, well, the whole thing got a little bit bizarre or crazy, but there were some great elements I'm going to take back to the main mix that I would have been too scared to try on my own, or maybe I just, wouldn't have been in that right mindset. But maybe that's a better way to say it. I wouldn't have been in the right mindset more than scared, because I'm not really scared to do anything. It's just like you thinking like, oh, I've got to kind of make this all work together like this, but you cut out some of the options that are available by not playing with it too much.
That's brilliant, right?
And I like what Brian said. I go with the sound of Spinal Tap. 11 sounds better. There you go. Turn it to 11.
Behind me, my Soldano SLO actually goes to 11 on the dials.
On the dial.
Everything all goes up to 11 because of Spinal Tap.
Of course.
All right, guys.
But you would not. Sorry, go ahead.
And on that note, a jazz odyssey now.
Wrap us up. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to talk about?
I mean, it's just a crazy deep well. This has been fun to talk about. I mean, we could go on and on. I think we kind of covered a lot of great stuff, so we don't want to bore the good people too much with our.
Yeah, it's a topic we can always come back to as well. I think it'd be nice if we can get some of the technical issues ironed out. It'd be good to kind of go through some audio examples in real time and see signal paths and things like that as well. So
yes, my apologies on my end there. Yeah.
No, it's totally cool. It's like you said, it's a deep well, man. So we can always
we can come back to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, I've got to show this off. I think I did on Jamie's show, but never on our show. It's going back home tomorrow. It's my buddy's. It's a Rickenbacker light show conversion. And this thing is so amazing and beautiful that before we go, I just got to show you people what it looks like. It's not plugged in or anything here.
That's pretty wild looking.
That's amazing. It's amazing.
They came out with this. This is a modern guitar, but they came out with this in like 1970 or something. So it should tell you a little bit about the motivations of it.
Oh, really? That's not a modern piece. That's like that's hilarious.
Well, yeah, this is a year-old guitar or something. It's like a 2021 that was converted, but the original light show models came out in 1970. Yeah, so
that makes sense.
I just it's like the coolest thing ever. I'm so jealous of it.
I need to get a multi-tom drum set like that, where it, just when you hit the drum, it lights up. Yeah, just when you hit it, though, because then it'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, things are moving around.
I never thought about that. I always thought it would be cool to have a keyboard that had lights, like LEDs, like that, especially because you can like with the Ableton Push or like the what's the other one, the Launchpad or whatever. You can actually program those lights on the panels to do certain things when you hit buttons and stuff. And I always thought it'd be kind of a cool thing, especially in a performance setting, to have like a key bed that has these LEDs that you can do stuff, and it kind of emphasizes the performance a little bit. And then I tried the Lumi keys, the Rolly Lumi keys. Yeah. And it was the biggest piece of crap. It doesn't feel good to play. It's a great idea. It's just, it was really not fun to use that.
That would be cool though in a performance setting. Yeah. If you had like a really tight camera angle on the keys or something, and then projected behind you. Yeah. So people can see what you're up to, because that's one of the things that in our genre of electronic music, it really gets lost. With a guitar player, if you're Townsend, you can do windmills and make a big show out of things. But when if you're on modular and you're twisting a little knob, and it could be making the most, you know what I mean? It could be making the most dramatic sound change possible, but this is your emotion in it. It's like
3 centimeters to the left.
Not very exciting. So we need some help. So maybe you need to develop that keyboard.
Yeah. I think what's his face? Crap! I just saw him at the NOM show too. The dude from Dream Theater, like he's got that. Whatever he's using as a controller, a big Korg or something, like 88 key thing, but it's mounted on like hydraulics or something. So he's getting there and he's getting it up like this and playing it around. He's trying to put a little show into it.
I give him credit because it's pretty hard to be like an entertaining presence when you're standing in front of a keyboard. You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think that's why
Jordan Rudess.
Jordan Rudess
hides in the cube and then puts a bunch of stuff on the cube. It's cooler to watch than him sitting there pushing a button,
Right.
So when we go on tour, guys, this is what's going to be. Is Marshall's going to have all of the lighted keys and the keyboard that flips around and stuff like Jordan Rudess. Tim will be playing drums like upside down, like Tommy Lee, and over the the little crowd roller coaster, and I'll do the light show guitar, and
we'll be huge, man. We'll be gigantic,
especially in Europe because they like weird stuff like that, don't they?
Easy now.
Oh, sorry.
We love our European brothers.
All right. Well, I guess on that note, we can wrap it up there, guys. So thanks to everyone in the chat room for tuning in. It's been a great time. We'll be back next Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. What time is that? 6 Pacific?
6 p.m. West Coast, yeah.
Yep. 6 p.m. for you, Chris. 8 p.m. for me. 9 p.m. for Marshall. 2 a.m. for the UK.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Thanks guys. That was fun. I learned stuff again. I learn things from you guys every time. So, and from the chat, from the show, from the show. It's always cool, man. All right.
Likewise.
All right. Take care.